would you describe or summarize the responsibilities of being a barn manager?
The primary thing is the day-to-day operations. So feeding horses, watering them, doing stalls, all of their physical needs for the day. In addition to that, it would be managing other staff, checking in with clients about anything that's coming up, scheduling vet and farrier, but the day-to-day care of feeding, any sort of medical things that come up would be the primary aspect of that position.
And then what was your starting salary, and did it increase as time went on?
So it's kind of a funny question to answer because I was running my own barn. So I was managing my own barn. So I didn't have a set salary.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really an interesting look at the business aspect of running and operating a boarding and lesson facility. And it really fluctuated a lot. So I had, before I accepted that offer for that program, I really had to do the breakdown of what are my feed costs? What are my operating costs? How much can I spend on employees doing my work? And how much do I need to be making sure that I'm doing the work, so I'm saving on labor costs, and what do I need to be charging for boarding and everything. So a lot of my money went back into the program.
Mm-hmm.
And I was running that business 6-7 days a week. I was on the farm most days a week. It was very much a labor of love.
Mm-hmm.
So salary wise, like I said, it was never really set, and a lot of it went back into it. But income was definitely less than $20,000 a year. So it was a low income position, and it fluctuated, but it did grow. And a lot of the profit aspect of it came from lessons.
Okay.
There's not really a lot of profit in standard boarding.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much operating costs that I was able to board my 2 horses for free. So I never paid out of my own pocket for any of their care. But that's really sort of the operating costs to have the doors open.
All right. And how did you come by this job? Was it like something you had to sort of get your foot in the door and work towards, or did you just sort of up and do it?
It's sort of an interesting story, and I feel like everyone really has their own story of how they ended up where they did in the horse industry. So I definitely worked my way through. I dropped out of college because I knew I wanted to be full-time in the horse industry. I loved being on the equestrian team, and I just kind of went for it. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a job lined up. I found a horse to lease and was offered a position teaching riding lessons and coaching their show team at that facility. And as I did that, I ended up finding an opportunity at another farm that was full-time managing. And I took that position and started a riding program there. Moved my horses to another facility that I was going to be managing. And the owner of that program, or of that business, had some interesting stuff happen in their life, and they pretty much up and left. So I had a little bit of a heads up of that. They were moving on to a different situation completely. It was kind of a rocky situation, but I had enough time that the owner of the property offered me the option to take over the lease of the facilities. So I did a bunch of math, and I was not in a position to start a business necessarily, but the opportunity was there, and I calculated everything, and it was enough that I could at least do it. And it was not a long-term binding lease. So I talked to all the existing boarders and a couple people that former clients I've had in the industry who I knew were looking for different options. And I basically said, hey, here's what I can offer. If we can, if we're all in on this, we can make it work. And I'm willing to put everything I've got into it to make this work. And it did. So it was definitely kind of a weird way for that to come up, but it worked.
All right. What would you say are the minimum job qualifications for the job of barn manager?
On an easy day, they're very low.
Mm-hmm.
On a tough day, that's where really the difference of somebody who is qualified and somebody who is unqualified is going to show up. Because anyone can read a feed label and scoop the right amount of grain or put the right hay in the right field. When things come up, medical emergencies or just odd scenarios of something that's kind of not seeming right with a horse, or a pipe bursts, those are really where qualifications matter. And I think one of the two biggest things that I saw in myself, and then also working for other people in the industry, were just experience. How much time have you spent around horses? Have you experienced medical emergencies? I mean, learning about them in theory and seeing it and experiencing it are two different things. And things will come up that you've never seen before, and that's okay. But if you've got a really good general idea of what can go wrong and when to call the vet and what you can get started on yourself, it's so beneficial, because that time and those mistakes can be huge. If you're missing something, I mean, the moment that something looks off, that's when you want to start checking temperatures. You want to check, anything else that's normal for that horse. Check respiration, because if you're just like, oh, that's weird, and then you leave and no one comes back till the next morning, a lot can happen. So the other thing is, things are always going to come up that are unexpected, unusual, unknown. And are you willing to stay calm, think through it, and look at what resources you have? That's another big thing. Because there were definitely things like the pipe bursting. I am not a plumber. I don't know anything about plumbing, but I had a day, it was my maybe first or second month of running the farm, that something had not been done properly previously, and a pipe froze and burst, and we had water everywhere. And one of my employees and I were like, all right, can-do attitude. What do we know we can do in this one? What do we have? How can we address the initial issue right now? And then what do we need moving forward? We ended up, getting a plumber on site and everything, but there's an old saying that anything can be fixed with duct tape and baling twine. And in a lot of sense, that's really true. That just that willingness to problem solve and think creatively and go right for solutions instead of getting manic or hyped up or hysterical or shutting down completely is going to matter. And that's going to matter when you have clients who are upset and yelling in your face. It's going to matter when you have a horse that is spooking and reactive. It's that ability to stay calm and think rationally instead of having an emotional reaction is huge. And that's not something that really comes from experience. To me, that's a lot of that's a personality trait, and can be learned and cultivated and practiced for sure. But if you're resourceful and you can sort of think through what needs to be done, that will get you really far.
That makes sense. Let's see. Was there anything in particular that you disliked about the job?
Now that I work more of a 9-to-5 job, upon reflection, how demanding the schedule was really tough, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I loved it. I had a great group of people that I was around, but it was tough that I worked on holidays, and to the extent possible, I gave my employees time off or their choice of time on holidays, and then my family events and whatever had to work around that. And there were a lot of events that I missed because I had to work. It was my business and horses needed to get fed, and that was that. So that was tough. And it's exhaustive too, that when you're doing hard labor every day, you're waking up early, that it'll wear you out. And so I definitely appreciate now having more breaks and having a little bit more time off. But it's true that if you love what you do, you don't really need a whole lot of time off for it. But a little bit is good. Breaks are good. So it can be a really demanding schedule. That's
Mhm.
tough. And then for me, the other thing that was really tough, the horses were always the easy part.
Mhm.
They were I mean, they're pretty straightforward. You get what you get. Dealing with people
Mhm.
was really tough sometimes. And I was very lucky that a lot of the people that I had as clients were people I'd known previously. So that was helpful. But people care very deeply for their horses. So there's a lot of emotional investment. There's a lot of financial investment. And at least in the boarding industry, the owners are not, their animals don't live at home. So something that they love very dearly and put a lot of money into, someone else is handling their care. And you're never going to agree 100% of the time. So things can get uncomfortable when people are on different pages or would handle something differently. So learning to deal with the people was definitely sometimes a challenge point. Particularly if you're talking with someone who has never been in your position and worked that side of it, it can be hard to sort of explain, well, like, here's how we do it, and this is why this decision was made. And there were times that I had to say, where there's a couple things we've tried to work through, and I don't think that this is the right fit for you.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to, help you find another facility or not, but this is not going to go work for us moving forward.
Mhm. Speaking of how demanding it was, how often did you have extra hands?
I had, let's see, depending on, we changed a little bit, but 2 to 4 employees that helped with feeding. I also had at a couple different times up to 2 other riding instructors that I employed. So I would say that I did, on average, 2/3 of the work. There were times that it was about half of the feeding shifts were allocated to employees, but about roughly 2/3 of the work was stuff that I took on personally.
And then roughly how much of the job was hands-on and how much was more like administrative, clerical, paperwork, that kind of thing?
Almost all of it was hands-on. One of the things that was important to me is to make sure that there was some of the administrative side. And that's something that I noticed was really lacking in a lot of the other facilities and programs where I worked.
Mhm.
And it made it that much harder when we had to do taxes or when we had to do any sort of office stuff or registering for things. Horse people tend to really love horses
Mhm.
and not always be so good at the office kind of stuff, myself included. But I learned from watching sort of what not to do.
Mhm.
And I just really made sure that I did, I had client intake forms and I had good contracts and when people came in as new clients, I had them fill out forms that had, contact information. They had to submit a picture of their horse and all of their information. So everything existed as a reference. And that was something that I had in the barn in a binder. So if it ever needed to be known, it wasn't like, oh, well, so-and-so's, out at a horse show. So maybe call them and maybe they have it shoved in a desk somewhere at home. And that little bit of work on the forefront really helped everyone on the back end. Because there were times that I saw a rider who at other facilities who had fallen or had an injury and nobody had their emergency contact information handy. It was, in a locked drawer somewhere else. So it is important to make sure you're doing at least a little bit of the office side. It was a very small part of it, which makes it easy to forget it sometimes. So I just made sure I had a checklist of everything I needed from everyone when they started lessons, when they came in as a new boarder, whatever it was. And then I used digital copies of things, and that made it easier when it came to doing taxes. Taxes were the biggest pain. because everything that was a deduction had to be manually entered in, and everything was so different and unusual from other businesses. So having all that organized right there made it a lot easier. But definitely, it's hands-on. It's totally hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
You can't feed a horse from your desk at home.
What was one of your favorite aspects about the job?
A lot of them. There were a lot of them, and some days I really miss it. But the community was pretty awesome. I had a lot of really, really cool people that worked for me, that boarded with me, that made it totally worth it. All the hard work was totally worth it because I wasn't always alone. And there was good support, and there were people to share that with and experience that with. I miss seeing my horses all the time. I am now a boarder. I board them at another facility, and they're retired, and I work full time, not taking care of horses, so I don't see them as much. And so I miss that part too.
Mm-hmm.
And it is nice. I would caution anyone who thinks that running a boarding farm means you're going to ride your horses all the time. You'll get lots of time to do that, because that was not always the case. But I got to see them every day, and I got to know them so well, because I knew everything about their care. The moment something was odd about them, I noticed, and just kind of spending time with them. That was really nice.
So I think you answered this earlier. I was going to say, would you call this a sort of 9-to-5 job or odd long hours? But
not a 9-to-5. It generally won't be. I think the more money that is invested in a program, the more possibility somebody has for it being more structured hours. If there is a large staff, there's going to be schedule changes and shift changes, but if you've got a really large staff and you can afford to pay a large staff, then you probably are going to have more regular hours. Or if you're an owner who can afford not to do all of the day-to-day activities, then you could most likely have on any given day set hours that's when you're around, or that's what you're doing things. But that's unusual in that industry. And it's horses, they don't work on a 9-to-5 schedule, and things come up. There's care that's needed. Somebody's going to break a fence, somebody's going to get hurt, something is going to happen. So if you really like structured time, it's probably not the right industry.
That makes sense. Do you have any pet peeves regarding management of the horses?
Pet peeves in the industry, or like personal things that would irritate me?
Like, for instance, like with your barn in particular, was there any anything that aggravated you between either the owners, the staff, where you're just very particular about?
One of the things that I learned pretty early on is to be very upfront with those things. Because everyone's got their things. Even the most laid back person has their thing. So being upfront with people, like, this is something that I am really tough about or harsh about, is a good thing. I'm trying to remember what some of mine were, though. I definitely had things. Anything safety related was really high. So don't leave things in the aisle. Make sure that gates are closed. I am very particular about how tack is taken care of, because it is expensive. And when it breaks, sometimes it can't be fixed. So that was one thing that I would, especially my youngest students, I would teach them right away. I was like, this is how you hang a bridle. This is how you hang a halter. This is the right way to put a saddle on the tree. But I would also explain to them why. Because if you're just told to do the thing because it's important, you're not going to remember to do it. If you understand, if it hangs this way, it'll keep the shape and last for a long time. If you hold it this way, it can bend and break right here, and now it doesn't work anymore. I mean, people will remember the whys behind it. And I think it helps too for anyone who's got this kind of advice, but for the people who have reasons behind certain fears that they get really, you know, if you tell people, hey, I had this happen once and that's why I'm so serious about it, they're more likely to get it and be on board with you, even if it's not one of their things that's really important to them. And there are so many things in the horse industry that are just like, one little thing can get off if it's the wrong dosing or the wrong feed or putting the wrong horse in the wrong field. I mean, like they're high stakes. Everything's really high stakes and really expensive. So I definitely understand why people have their pet peeves. It makes sense to me.
And what is something you wish you had known going into the job?
It's a good question. I don't know. This isn't quite answering your question, but I always felt like I had a running list in my mind at any position I was working in that if I ever have my own farm, I'll do it this way. It would be either exactly the way I'd seen it done or drastically different, learning from what I saw didn't work. And I always thought in the back of my mind, maybe it's different. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it is harder than I think, because it seems like it's quite simple. And I got to the position where I had my own farm and I realized it is really simple. Like, running a farm is not complicated. There's a lot you need to know and there's a lot of work that goes into it, but it's not complicated. And so I wish I kind of had that thought, but I wish I had seen that in other people, that people just get weird about things and they get bizarre and make things complicated and have weird systems that don't work. And so when I had my place, I just sort of tried a few things. I saw what was most efficient, what worked best, and I just did it. So I guess what I wish I had known was that there's not some magic achievement that somebody really needs to be good enough to run the business. I did not have a business background. Math is not my strong suit, but I figured it out. And I really saw that as sort of like an us and them thing, that the people who are the professionals in the industry had some sort of, I don't know, like they had been dubbed by someone that they were could do this, and then I did it. And it's money is a big thing in the industry, and the arrangement that I had at my farm, I fell into the perfect opportunity and I was qualified and all that, but I would not have been able to afford to just start that business from nothing. So it is hard. Money is a big aspect of the industry, but in terms of building up skills and ability, without that part, kind of anyone can do it. If you're driven and you're willing to work hard, because you will. So I kind of wish I'd known that sooner, I guess, so that I had felt like that was something I could achieve instead of it sort of happening and realizing it could happen when it did. I think I would have maybe made different choices along the way, recognizing how far I could go in that industry. I just didn't even realize that was possible.
Yeah. Well, that concludes all of the questions. It was really great talking about it, and I genuinely learned a lot. Like, I don't know, I guess in my mind it wasn't quite as grueling as it sounds, but now like 7 days a week makes sense. So how old were you when, I was gonna say, how old were you when you did that?
Let's see. Right before this, I was trying to remember what years I was running that farm. I was 21 when I managed my first farm for a different owner. So I think I was 23 or 24 when I ended up taking over the lease at the farm where I was and just being totally responsible for everything. I think it was like from 24 till I was around 26, I think. And at that point, my landlords decided to close the farm. They were done with the daily, dealing with all of it. They wanted their piece of land back. So it was a successful business. It just sort of life closed that chapter. But I was young. I was definitely young, which helped because I had energy. I had the energy to put everything I had into it every day of the week. So.
Yeah, it sounds, despite being a ton of work, it sounds very fulfilling, I guess. But no, thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.